Rock and roll came to the Midwest. In 1957, Myron Wackendorf heard Tommy James at the Dakota Ballroom in Sioux Falls. He decided then to play rock and roll. He changed his name to Myron Lee, formed a band called the Caddies, and toured with Dick Clark and the Caravan of Stars. He played with the Stars, he became one himself, and on Saturday night, he could pack the old Sioux Falls Coliseum.
Gonna rock around the clock tonight.
Time rolled on, and in the early 60s, the biggest rock shows in South Dakota played here at the Sioux Falls Arena. Well, if there's a spot to see a concert in the Sioux Falls Arena, it's up here in the press box overlooking the vast main stage floor. And two friends have come up to join us, Ken Mills from KXRB, KIOV Radio, and Harley Worthit from KELO Radio. Thank you both for joining us today.
Hi.
This is kind of a familiar setting to both of you guys.
That's right.
Being involved with music, and it was early back in '65, really, that rock music first came to Sioux Falls, didn't it?
The era that Harley and I spanned here pretty much began in '65.
Okay, Harley, you were involved in those early days, so what was your role then?
Well, I was a disc jockey, just a simple disc jockey on the radio station. That was the extent of my involvement in it.
Ken, you were doing a little more, though. You were booking acts and creating talent.
That's right, and my beginning in booking talent happened about the same time that Harley started in radio. In fact, I remember the first time I remember Harley was associated with one of the early events here in Sioux Falls. It was when a movie called The Tammy Show played here at the State Theater here in Sioux Falls. And it was shot on black and white videotape and then transferred to film and featured some terrific performances by, Diana Ross and the Supremes, the Rolling Stones, and
Jan and Dean.
Jan and Dean MC'd. That's right. That's right. And the first time I ever met Harley was after that show that night. And I told him that I was the manager of a local rock and roll band, which was a little bit presumptuous on my part because really at that time the band was only getting going and I really had just gotten started myself at that time. And the first job I ever booked for the band, which was Dale Gregory and the Shouters, was the name of the band, by the way.
Getting the plugs in here.
That's right. Was down at the YMCA Gymnasium here in Sioux Falls. And we didn't know how many people would show up, and so we thought we'd put the admission price a little high just to cover our costs. So we had it at 75 cents a person to get in. And we had over 800 people show up that night, and it was promoted on KELO Radio. And Dale Gregory and the Shouters at that time became, well, one of the top local bands, and after a period of time became probably the top local band in the Sioux Falls area for at least a couple of years.
In 1965, the drummer for Dale Gregory and the Shouters was 13-year-old Ted Christie. The Shouters were the first local rock band to have their own portable stage and light show. From the green...
Know when somebody loves you. Know when somebody cares. Know when somebody feels it too, 'cause it's there.
Okay, we saw some national artists on film then at the Tammy Show.
That's right.
But when did we see national artists first in Sioux Falls?
I think, now, you can correct me on this, was it the Shouters or the Hearstmen that played with the Hollies on that date?
That was the Shouters.
The Shouters?
Yeah, Dale
Okay, now that was down at the Coliseum. Now the Hollies, before they even hit, even in England, really large, were at the Coliseum here in 1965. It was almost like an after-the-game type dance. And the Shouters and the Hollies were on the same bill.
And it was the Hollies' first appearance here in the United States, and it was their second or third stop on their U.S. tour. And I remember how fascinated they were by seeing a color television. And of course, things changed very fast for them because they had a lot of hits after that. I think Bus Stop was probably their current hit about that time. But there were a lot of things that were going on in and around the area, both with local and with national bands. My little booking agency from when I was in high school went from first being Dale Gregory and the Shouters, just one group, to 4 groups after a while, and it was really amazing to see the whole cultural phenomenon that went on at the time. Now, many of the people got into the bands because they were really talented musicians and really had that yearning to be musicians, and other people got into the bands just because it was a social phenomenon, just because there was so much of the phenomenon. And I think all of that really started with the Beatles. You know, the Beatles were really an inspiration for all of us because they really showed that 4 guys without much money can get equipment that doesn't need to be that fancy and create.
The Beatles did their show in the Twin Cities cities, and on the following Monday, did it like on a weekend, and then the following Monday or Tuesday down here in Sioux Falls, the Beach Boys performed right here at the Sioux Falls Arena, and I was one of the earliest of the national acts that have appeared right here at the arena.
And the Beach Boys kind of found a home here in Sioux Falls. They played here regularly.
Yes, they did. But you know, Harley, I remembered who the first national act was that came in that year. We were talking about this, and it was the Byrds who played at the Coliseum Annex. And it was when they first had Mr. Tambourine Man out, and they came in a bus. They were traveling all around the country in a bus, and they did a 4-hour concert and show and dance at the Coliseum that night. And as I remember, they got $1,000 for that performance there at the Coliseum, which, you know, in terms of today's money is, you know, practically nothing at all. But I remember that was the first national act that came through that year. And then the attention switched out here to the arena as the bigger shows came in. And I think that, one of the biggest ones I remember was the night that Herman's Hermits came in with a sort of little-known backup band backing them up.
The Animals?
The Animals.
That's
Eric
right.
Burdon and the Animals. And, of course, that was a terrific show. And, another great show out here was the one that featured as the headline group, Freddie and the Dreamers, who a lot of people will remember.
And the hidden act in that was the McCoys, who did what they opened that show, didn't they?
They opened the show, yeah,
and, tell
with
me
Rick Derringer.
Rick Derringer.
And the middle group was the Bull Brummels from San Francisco, who were one of the very influential American groups at that time in the folk rock scene.
At this particular time, the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars were a big thing, and they stopped here on a couple of occasions. And one of the big shows included Gene Pitney, and there was Bobby Goldsboro on that show. And let's see, who else was on that show?
Oh, you know, I
Chad and
remember,
Jeremy.
yeah, Chad and Jeremy, but I remember one that probably a lot of people wouldn't, and that was Norma Tanega. Can you name that song? Can you name that?
I can name that tune in 3 notes.
Me and my cat named Dawn were walking high against the fall.
You would follow the Fabulous Flippers are going to be at the Showboat.
See if you can remember this. From out of the sky, blast the blazing blue lightning of the breathtaking blue. They're outstanding, and they are wild. All of these things. Here comes the Flippers.
What you know about life?
We had
Know life.
several socials, big dances, like
What you
you'd have a Washington High School, Lincoln High School, Rapid City would come. You know, the big football socials, basketball games, you know, you would rent the Coliseum out, which Ken Mills did. Russ Kunkel ran the show at that point, and, you know, Ken would rent it out. We'd get 3,000 people there at $1.50 a head. You know, it would be packed. They'd all be sitting up there staring at the bands. You know, this is new for them. These guys are actually our age, and they're sitting up there and doing something that, what is this? You know, that no one had ever seen it before. It was new. You know, it was new to us. You know, we did. Well, how did we get involved in this? You know, just you know, were we zapped? We don't know. We're into it though.
to prove what you said to me now.
We're about 1965 now, late 66 perhaps. By now it's catching on. Not only Sioux Falls is having rock and roll music, but acts are being booked outside the Sioux Falls area. What were some of the acts in 66 that people were able to see outside of Sioux Falls?
Local groups, Dale Gregory and the Shouters, as I mentioned. The other groups that I booked were the Dynamic Horsemen and Those of Us, the Trippers. A few of the other bands that I was associated with were the Tories from Huron. The Escapades were another band from Sioux Falls. The Muddy Ruts were from Mitchell. And can't think of any other.
A lot of memories.
Yeah, I can't really think of any other ones right now, but the kind of places we play would be the Island Park Ballroom in Milltown, South Dakota, the Hollyhock Ballroom in Hatfield, Minnesota, the Showboat Ballroom in Lake Benton, the Ruskin Park Ballroom in Forestburg, South Dakota. The Del Rapids Pavilion was really at that time a very popular place. And then there were all the National Guard armories and American Legion halls and things like that around the area. And here locally in Sioux Falls, I think probably the center, well, there were two places that were the centers. There was the old Coliseum Annex downtown next to what is now the Coliseum Theater. I think it burned down in about 73. And right here at the Sioux Falls Arena, because this is where the really big shows were.
Generation, just because we get around. Talking about my generation. Things they do look awful. Talking about
While rock music was gaining in popularity east of the river, in the mid-60s in the Black Hills, country music was dominant. From Dan's back porch in Spearfish, Single Jim remembers the early days of rock in the Black Hills.
Well, the big stars came through here. A lot of them did. And Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps and Buddy Holly, and we're playing right over here along with Gary Mulder and his local band, and along with, I wrote some of them down here, the Ventures. I saw them the first time over here at the Spearfish Pavilion, and there's a good many more of them.
You know, I can't remember, Rich, it's been that long. But there was a time when we were going to Selby, South Dakota. So my folks, both being musicians, my mother and father both, they know the circuit. They've done it all their lives. You know, we could go into that, but I won't right now. But for some reason, something occurs to them that we've got to raise our son right. He's got to go to school. You know, this guy's got to go to school. We can't let him run off like we did. You know, we can't quit high school. So what happens is Thursday night they come in after a conference in their closed bedroom. Chad, you can't go to Selby. You know, oh. I see the band's counting on me, you know, a four-piece band and the drummer can't go to Selby. Well, what do you think that means, you know? Back then, you know, there's nothing hotter in my whole life than going to the gig.
In 1966, I remember that some very big concerts came to the Sioux Falls area, and I think that one of the biggest ones I remember out of that summer was Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I think they inspired a lot of the local groups, because I remember the Hearstmen in a dance on the Sioux Falls parking ramp started doing that same type of Mark Lindsay dancing with the guitar and moving around. They were really showmen.
Yeah, I think Paul Revere and the Raiders were a very influential band in the way that they presented themselves on stage. And of course their songs were fairly easy for the bands to learn too. And so a lot of the bands copied them both on stage and their songs and how they looked. And I also think that that was part of the reason that the bands at that time, if you look back at some of the photos from that time, they had the uniforms, you know, the bands were dressed up in uniforms. Well, that was inspired by Paul Revere and the Raiders, who were, as you look back on it, a great piece of marketing that came out of Dick Clark and that. But, you know, at the time we were looking at it through much different eyes. We were looking at these people as being, you know, somehow role models or people to follow. And they were exciting days.
We're talking about people who wore uniforms at that particular time. Yeah, the Beatles even wore uniforms at that particular time. They all wore the same type of suit coat and so on. But those Byrds, when they came in, they weren't wearing that kind of an outfit. They were kind of doing their own thing at that particular time.
And they were really forerunners of the future in a way, because this era was a very special era, but like all eras, it had to come to an end or a change or whatever. And I think that the thing that Harley just talked about the musicians wanting to do their own thing, translated into the individuals and the bands and whatever. And by 1969, everybody was so concerned about doing their own thing that not as much music was being made, consequently. And so that time from about maybe, 65 to 67, those 2.5 years were really the prime years for the type of thing that we're talking about here.
I particularly feel lucky in the fact that I personally grew up with the Beatles. You know, I'm 13 years old and the Beatles come out. I call up my friends on the phone, play the record, my boyfriends, play the record and sing along with them, and we all, you know, fantasize, let's have a group, you know, where we all hair down to here with a shaved head, you know. The whole scene, it was just so much energy at that time that it could not be denied, it could not be stopped, it was there. I don't care if your parents locked you up, you would find the key, you know. That's it.
Something must have happened between 69 and 73 that causes a dip in local music. There's kind of a, in our research, we find kind of a little bit of a hole in there, although we're still talking about the Pilgrims and DJ and the Runaways. The Apostles were still playing. They started in 66 and played right through till 76, probably one of the longest-lived groups through all those periods. But something else happened there, two things basically. The Vietnam War and drugs.
The ones who were really serious about music stuck with it and reformed into the groups that later surfaced. But a lot of people at that time were going through big changes in your life, the type of things that you're talking about, but also the attention of the audience seemed to go from supporting the local bands to being concerned about the superstars, the gigantic superstars that were around at that time.
The lyrics of the mid-'60s, early '60s, that 50 bop shabop stuff, that had been transcended by the things that were being said at the national level, which was we'd gone to the lyric of the importance of lyrics back in the the Vietnam era. What Barry McGuire's hit Eve of Destruction, we start talking in terms of protest songs and things being said on the national level, and Woodstock, and people attempting to gain their own identity. And here in the late '60s, where people are learning to be who they are or to find themselves, the Beatles do exactly the same thing. They split. They become entities of themselves.
We see then developing in about 1972 a resurgence and a new birth in local music in South Dakota with groups like Rosewater, Blueberry Buckle. Some of the new ones get started again. It's the first time really that we've had a local voice in the lyric. After the attention is turned to the lyric nationally, now we come back locally and start looking for lyrics. How about the early days of those bands, Buckle and Rosewater?
Well, those were very idealistic days because they kind of mirrored the early days of when the bands first got together, when I first got associated with them in early '65, because nobody really had any money, nobody really had any direct marketing plan or direction of what they wanted to do, but they did have things that they wanted to say, and that's the one big difference between the bands there in the early '70s. And more of the concern was, well, let's just go play a free concert for people and get our message out to the people. That was really a lot of the feeling there in about '71, '72, '73. There were a lot of events that went on down at the Clay County Park down around Vermilion. There were some free events that went on around Terrace Park here in Sioux Falls by bands, well, Rushmore, mention the name of that band, The Trees, and other bands like that that were playing around here in that area.
I would say that drugs and as far as concert things went, and you probably noticed a change there, anybody did, that they quit dancing for a while. They went into the psychedelic music, and everybody went to a concert, rolled their coat up and sat on it, or laid down on the floor, or outside, and they brought a pillow or something, or a car seat, and sat down, and they enjoyed the music as something. Mental exercise or mental enjoyment or something, and they were about the only physical thing was they'd pop their fingers or move their toe up and down inside their shoe, and then it was a very welcome thing, a change, I'm sure, for all the musicians who play music, even though I was working concerts in that day, and I enjoyed the audiences, I enjoyed being treated the way they treated me, but I sure missed the stomping, you know, the getting up and dancing and being on their hind legs and whooping it up and having a good time. So that's...
Okay, between 72 and 76, after Kidsborough had broken up, you know, everybody took a look at their situation, and every one of us saw it different, you know. Some of us continued to play music, make it better. Some of us thought, hey, I'm going to go work for my father, or I'm going to get a job, I'm going back to college. Some of us went back to college. Okay, about 74, I came to Rapid City, Lee, Deadwood, that area. A good friend of ours opened up a place called the Ore House. It was a great bar, you know, everybody came there, and we started playing there. People like Mike Connor, the first Dried Mustard Band, myself, we played there, Dave Houck, and everybody, my old cronies played there.
In '72, several interesting things happened. First off, we ended the Vietnam War. Secondly, a lot of the groups from Sioux Falls, Dry Mustard and Blueberry Buckle, made their first appearances West River, where up to this point all they've had is country western music and a few of the national shows. So rock and roll in South Dakota has finally come to the Black Hills in the early '70s. Slowly, in the early '70s, East River bands started to influence the West River country music scene. In 1972, Dan Iceland started booking acts at Dan's Back Porch in Spearfish.
The first group I think I can remember getting into involved Single Jim and also Kenny Muller and Stu Ferguson and a kid from Mountain Home, Idaho by the name of Dean Holberg. Strong four-piece group, and they played here as a house band for, about a year, I imagine. Then they broke up, and I started then booking in some of the bands, and some of them are still working here to this day. I will mention also that Buck Hingham and Ted Christie played a duo. They was actually the first two people I ever hired before Single Jim. Actually, my first fall in the business, the fall of '72. And I would say my first band, the first major band I had in out of town band was Dry Mustard from Sioux Falls in that area, Vermilion in the eastern part of South Dakota. And from there it started out with Blueberry Buckland on down the line. Red Willow started playing for me, and they still do to this point.
There was a change in the music, and it was long overdue. And like the Blueberry Buckle and Dry Mustard were two of the first very influential bands from east of the river that influenced this part of the country. And Red Willow, yes. Geez, how could I leave them out? And the Red Willow band, naturally, and they were around here for a long time. In fact, they played up the old style all summer long once, didn't they?
It won't shine for you or me.
If the biggest rock show in Sioux Falls or in South Dakota was in the arena in '72 with Three Dog Night, then some of the largest outdoor shows have to be the Nemo concerts.
That's true. The Nemo concerts are extremely big in terms of the number of people involved. Also, Rich, we shouldn't forget the State Fair in here, and I don't know the attendance figures of some of the shows there, but they have had some live concerts. Also at the Central States Fair in Rapid City, they've had live concerts too. But the Nemo shows, I think, were unique because they were set totally away from any other existing promotional structure or setting. And they really, in many ways, were South Dakota's echo to Woodstock, the Nemo concerts, because they were basically groups from this area, or the larger area, if you consider Minneapolis, and the people who came there were largely from the 4 or 5 state area that would be around there. And once again, the Nemo concerts being set in the Black Hills, that's a lot of the magic of it right there, too.
With a part-time life at home. Well, how you doing? See you Sunday. I wonder what I'll do today. I'll be here at police till tomorrow, and wish I had your arms around me.
I myself started putting concerts together out in Beulah, Wyoming. In '72, we first started having the Redwater Revival. And I think I had the first music in '75 or '76. I would say Nemo and the Redwater Revival started as far as live music about the same time. Yeah, it would have to, about '76, '75, yeah.
I walked over to where they were singing this lonesome song. And I sit with a light on light guitar, man, you and me. But your sentence is way too long. Someday I'll get out, maybe get to shout.
The Nemo concert was first organized, I believe, by Wally and Red Willow, and along with the Solaces over there at the ranch, and I got into it slowly, you know, started appearing as a guest star with Shep the Wonder Dog, my bird, and got to where I now MC the show, and Shep the Wonder Dog helps. And Shep the Wonder Dog, he evolved in this area. I've had him 14 years, and he's played some of the biggest towns in the world, biggest hotels in Las Vegas and so on, and this is his official home here now. But he doesn't play music, but he's sure part of the culture. If I don't bring him down here at the bar, I sure catch hell about it.
Smack dab in the middle. Smack dab in the middle. I've got to rock and roll to satisfy my soul.
There must be something unique, though, about South Dakota music, because I haven't seen any groups yet with safety pins through their noses. You know, I'm still hearing Red Willow, I'm hearing Ivory, LSR, Flatland Express, that have a different kind of a South Dakota sound. Is there something you can pin down to that South Dakota sound?
I think it comes a lot with the rural area that we have here. I think that the people who are making music are still tied to the basic rural roots of the music. And whether it be rock music or country music or even jazz, all of it came out of a somewhat rural environment in America. And part of the reason why, say, say a Red Willow Band or R&B Supply or some of these other bands that are playing around here are still so popular is because they do have that feeling, that rural down-home feeling. And it's not saying that they're hee-haw kind of approach. It's just a basic human one-to-one approach. And that's, I think, the key to the South Dakota music, Rich.
In here, such as Zakarian, who have been very skillful at what they did.